but it doesn't create wealth. If it were wealth, all you'd have to do is run off the printing presses, and everybody would be wealthy if you printed a lot of money.
So it sounds like you say the federal government is counterfeiting our money right now.
In the moral sense, it's pure counterfeit.
Okay, and they're not supposed to be doing that. That's one of their...
That's exactly what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to guarantee that there is not counterfeit, but yet now they're the biggest counterfeiter. So we're worried about counterfeiters now in countries like Iran and other Far Eastern nations who are said to be, and probably are, printing up $100 bills.
Mm-hmm.
But that's tokened compared to, you know, like last year, the $40 billion of new money they created. No, $140 billion a year.
Out of thin air.
Out of thin air.
Another myth or fact, that easy money causes low interest rates.
Well, you see, this is a half-truth, because if the Fed all of a sudden increases credit, they can lower short-term interest rates. And they say, well, that's good, that'll stimulate the economy, and that is true. Artificially low interest rate does stimulate the economy. But then they don't have, what they don't have control of, what is the market's perception of the value of money. If you think that the dollar's going to lose 10% of its value, which it's been doing rather rapidly in terms of other currencies, all of a sudden you're not going to loan it out for 3 or 4 or 5%. You say, well, I want an inflation premium. So actually long-term increasing credit raises interest rates. So in the short run, it lowers interest rates.
Okay.
But then there's a need for, you know, in that crisis we had in 79 and 80, short-term interest rates went to 21%, and they weren't stingy on the money. You know, the money supply was going up rapidly, but people were perceiving the money as losing its value. So they said, boy, I want to protect myself against inflation. So they were demanding higher rates of interest. So government they really messed things up good. On the short run, they printed money, they lower the interest rate, they fool the consumer and the businessman.
Right, it feels good, employment goes up.
Yeah, and they figure, oh boy, low interest rates, I should be investing more money. That, in the marketplace, low interest rates means there's a lot of savings out there. When there's savings in the bank and interest rates are low, that means it's a good time for businessmen to reinvest and people to start borrowing and building. But these interest rates are artificially low. There has been no savings, and they're low because of government. So it causes the false impression that there's time to re-stimulate the economy, and then it causes an artificial boom, and then that
employment goes up. It feels good for a while,
and it leads to the next recession. Every boom leads to the recession later on.
Here's another myth: paper money can pay for the good things government does for people.
This is what I alluded to earlier, and that is one of the strongest motivating forces of the fiat currency and the undermining of the gold standard. In 1913, we had, you know, right in the middle of the progressive era, we had the notion that we should be an international government fighting wars overseas and doing all these things. At the same time, we were introducing the notion of welfare in this country. And it was at that time we established the Federal Reserve and the income tax to support big government. And this is the main reason. You have to undermine, if you followed the rules on the gold standard, no matter how strong the forces were to have a warfare state and excessive spending, the gold standard would limit us. If we'd have followed the rules of the gold standard in the 1960s, we wouldn't have had the breakdown of the Bretton Woods. The rules were that we were supposed to honor the dollar at $35 an ounce. But we didn't honor it. We created the money anyway.
We're putting additional money out into the economy.
Putting it out in order to finance what government wants. So systematically it was undermined until finally, you know, that we even took the silver out of the coins. And now there's no restraint. And if you look at the statistics, I'm sure in your classes you must see statistics on what happened to spending habits and deficit habits and all the things in price indices from 1971 on. They go along like this. They go up in, say, it was a Civil War period. We get back on gold prices and everything is here. And then World War II, it shoots up. But then in 1971, boy, everything is going off the chart.
Yes.
Mainly because there are no restraints. There's no monetary restraints. But it goes hand in hand. You know, you can blame the Federal Reserve and some conspiracy. You can blame the presidents. You can blame the Congress. But you can also blame the people. The people have developed an appetite and have retained an appetite for big government. So in spite of all this talk we've heard recently, on cutting back on the size of government,
Right.
there's still a lot of special interests out there. Oh, my God, you're going to cut out of school lunch.
That's right.
So the forces are there, still very, very powerful. The appetite is huge for the continuation of these programs. I mean, what was one of the first things they passed this year? A $2.4 billion supplemental appropriation bill with no offsetting cuts for the military.
Okay.
For overseas military expenditures in places like Somalia. Matter of fact, one freshman got into trouble because he suggested that he came here not to spend more money, and the Republicans got on his back. He said, you're going to get kicked off the committee if you don't vote for this increased expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
The forces are powerful.
Still there.
And that's why the gold standard had to be neutralized, and the economic forces and the political forces are such where people are starting to realize that this is a problem. But they could not have, we could have never had the size of government we had today if we had followed the rules of the gold standard, because we just didn't have the money.
Well, the rules of the gold standard, what you're saying, actually in the Constitution, one portion of your book you talk about the Constitution and the gold standard. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, it's very explicit in the Constitution that there should be no other item other than gold and silver being legal tender, and there's no authority to establish a central bank.
Mm-hmm.
There was a great debate in the Constitution Convention, and the subject was emitting bills of credit.
Mm-hmm.
And bills of credit was just paper money.
Mm-hmm.
And the vote was very clear. There was to be none. They had runaway inflation of the Continental. The states had inflated, and they had a lot of problems. So it came down on the side of hard money. But even the hard money Jeffersonians were competing at that time with the Hamiltonians, who were anxious to get in the act of strong federalism and a central bank. So this argument has gone on for a long time. It occurred, of course, with the Jacksonian era. It occurred at the turn of the century with McKinley's election, and it's ongoing. And although it's part of the big picture, it's still key because it's so vital to our economy. The money, the monetary policy of this country is vital, and currently we can witness that it's vital to world economies as well.
Another myth is politicians can be trusted with the printing press, and I think you've already answered that about 20 times.
It's the same thing, and this is why I even challenge the monetarists. I agree with just about everything Milton Friedman says about free markets.
Right.
But he comes down on the side of saying, well, we can trust the politician to print money at 3% a year, and of course that would probably be better than printing at 12 and then back down to 1 and then up to 8, like the Keynesians do and like we have today. But his whole system has to be based on trust in the amount of printing presses. And his argument, and I've debated him on this, and his argument back to me is, he says, well, this is the whole trouble with the gold standard, especially if you have a fractional reserve gold standard. You have 40% gold behind the currency, and it works for a while, then they lower it to 25%. And I said, well, fine, I agree with that. I don't believe in fractional reserve gold standard, and I don't believe in gold exchange standards.
So you believe in 100%?
100%, and it has to be a gold coin standard, so constantly, every day, the average man on the street can test his banker and his government on whether or not those certificates are truly redeemable in gold. He ought to always be able to go in. If he doesn't like what's happening, he ought to always be able to go in. Today, he'd have to maybe plop down $400 to get his ounce of gold, but he ought to always know that they're not printing too much money, that they have it there.
Well, if we don't have a fractional reserve system, how's that bank going to take that money and lend it out? How would that happen? Because that's part of the process, sir. And
they do this by not having fractional. Well, there's the fractional backing of the gold, and there's also the fractional reserve standard in paper, which is similar but not exactly the same. But the question is how do you loan it out? If you're the banker and I come in and I put 100 ounces in the bank and I want it there because I have a checking account, I might write a check against it. Well, no, you shouldn't loan it out. But let's say I want to come in and give you 100 ounces of gold and say I'll be back in a year.
In a time deposit.
Yeah, a time
and
deposit.